Hey everybody, this is Erica Mello, and I'm with my wonderful co-host Susan Clinton. Hi Susan, how are you?
I'm good, Erica. How are you?
I am
We've got a great
fine.
surprise for everybody today.
I know we are, first of all, welcome to podcast number 91. And if you are listening to this when it gets released, which will be this Thursday, February 11th, we are in the midst of a launch of our second round of our clinical mentoring mastermind. We had so much fun and we had such a great success with the first round. I know you're probably getting our emails. The deadline for the early bird special is this Thursday, February 11th at 11:59 Eastern Standard Time. So if you listen to it the minute it comes out, it will be Thursday, February 11th, 11:59 Eastern Standard is when the early bird special begins. If you miss that, no worries. You will have through Monday, February 15th at 11:59 to register. The course starts February 16th, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yep, for our first 75-minute group call.
Yes.
We're looking forward to welcoming the people that have already signed up into the program. We're very excited.
Yes.
And again, this early bird has been extended. So this is act now. If you're listening to this on February 11th, act now, because it'll only be good till February 11th at midnight Eastern Standard Time. So
yes, and I think people have wanted access to us more often than the podcast, or more frequently than the podcast, and so you asked, so we delivered, and we got such a great response to the first one. And Susan and I love doing this, so we would love to have you in the program. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us on social media. You can direct messages on Instagram at Erica Mello or at Susan Clinton, or on Facebook, same handles, or put a message in the Tough to Treat Facebook group. If you are not a member, please request to join. We hope hope to see you there. And onto the podcast. This is actually a Facebook Live that we released. I think this was one of our first ones. It was on thoracic mobility and the breath. And we know a lot of you are not in the Facebook group or don't have Facebook accounts. And we really wanted you to benefit from a lot of these lives that we have done, during this time. And it's really filled a large need in our profession to just have access to some coursework, since we can't really go in person very much anymore, at least for the time being. So we talk a lot about not just thoracic mobility, but Susan, I mean, you talk a lot about breath, and I'm just reading this book by James Nestor. I think you recommend it, right? Breath.
Yep.
So
I think we probably recommended it on the podcast too. So
yes, so it goes well beyond the breath and well beyond thoracic mobility. It was one of our first ones that we did, and it's a good one. So we hope you enjoyed, and as always, please leave us a review on iTunes. We would most appreciate it. It's a way that people can find us. Thank you. Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.
But it's Erica Mello and myself, Susan Clinton, and we're Tough to Treat. And we are coming to you on Facebook Live today on Thursday afternoon, March the 26th. And just to pop in and say hi, and maybe even talk just a little bit about the thorax today. Last time we did this was last week.
Yes.
And we did a progression on the foot and talked a little bit about the foot as kind of a key integral component to the kinetic chain and to the system. And so we thought it might be a great idea to talk a little bit about another transitional area, which is the thorax. And I think everybody's familiar with clinical prediction rules for treating the cervical spine. Oftentimes they ask you to go and treat the thorax first and see if you can clear up what's going on in the thorax, and that changes the cervical spine significantly.
Hang on one second, Susan. Sorry, I don't know. I don't see us on Facebook. So
take a look, Erica. We're both on.
We are, okay. Then I can't. Then I can't see the podcast. I can't see the comments. Oh, now I got it. I got it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, everybody. Go ahead, Susan. I'm still a novice at this Facebook Live stuff. Okay, go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Totally. So anyway, I like looking at the thorax as the big transition between the lower half of the body and the upper half of the body, even though the thorax is considered, above the waist and the top of the body. I find that when people have a lot of stiffness, and whatever you want to define stiffness as. It could just be muscle holding over recruitment. It could be just a movement pattern system that is a loop that is just, the thorax is just held still. And oftentimes that can drive or be a primary cause of sometimes the lumbar spine having a little bit of dysfunction, or the cervical spine, shoulders having dysfunction, or down into the hip as well. I think as Erica and I have talked about the whole system, we look at the thorax as being kind of one of the main drivers, or one of the main areas of focus when we have people even with foot pain, knee pain, hip pain, any type of lower extremity kind of discomfort, hip, back, and then of course shoulder, neck, head. And oftentimes we will find that if we can get in and intervene with the thorax and get the thorax moving differently, that it can be a huge changer into just being able to change movement patterns and movement system patterns for people.
Yep.
So sometimes they may be willing to squat differently or to stand on one leg differently, but if the thorax is being kind of held in a stiff position, it's hard to overcome, because it may have been something that developed as a habit or a compensation that has turned into a really strong component of a motor pattern that is now well defined and set in from the brain. And so being able to get in and change that can be really helpful for people being able to break out of some motor patterns that they may be stuck in, and to be able to gain some variance in them as well.
Yep, I 100% agree. And hi, Annie. Hi, everybody. Ali, Donnie. Hi, everybody. I'm just looking at the comments. I agree 100%. And I think that people who've listened to our podcast have known that, I do talk a lot about the thorax, and I believe that the main issue with the thorax is really a loss of control. It's ingrained, even though it's generally an inherently stiff joints. It's really a loss of control that's the problem. And you can manipulate somebody, and then it will unmask a loss of control many, many times. And that loss of control can affect many other regions of the body. And we can talk about this as well, but I've seen it very often correlated with issues in the feet, and, a primary foot or secondary foot with a thorax underlay. And it's really most likely, in my opinion, a loss of control. And it's not just hypermobile people. It's people who, we sit like this all day. Okay. I've had patients who say, oh yeah, I sit like this all day. I'm like, no wonder you're shifted to the left. Right. I've had a patient who carries a lot in her left hand all day long because she's in the theater, and she's like this, and her right foot hurts. Right. So it's the opposite foot. It will unmask movement patterns that people are just unaware of, that is their norm. So I do agree. And we often talk about, like, we title this sort of thoracic mobility beyond the breath, but I do believe that breath work, and you can talk more about this, is so important to start with. We just recorded a podcast this morning, and I have a patient that is really quite complicated. I just started seeing him, and I sorted him out with breathing and like lower trunk rotation. So do you want to talk more about that, Susan, and the breath work?
Sure, absolutely. So, and I think when we talk about context and words and everything, when Erica talks about control issues, I always sometimes use the word discoordination issues or coordination issues, this, and I think it's mostly what she's talking about too, is that we're talking about, a movement system pattern that isn't serving the person any longer, that maybe it was serving the person in the beginning to offload something, or to help them handle a load, or to help them cope with a load transfer. But that situation has passed, but the movement system has become a habit. And so that system is now ingrained as a primary system, which may not be serving them so well anymore. They've lost the variability to move in and out of that pattern. And sometimes when you can get that pattern to change, then you can get down to what actually really happened, before, and begin to help them begin to process that and reintegrate that movement pattern back in, which is something that we talked a lot about with the foot last week. Was how can we get the foot to integrate back in with the whole system and get that going? And then we were talking a little bit, you had brought up breath and breath control. Nothing's going to get the thorax moving better than breathing. Everybody breathes. So it's not an issue that people aren't breathing right or wrong. It's sometimes it just takes an intentional change of breathing to begin to like change how the thorax is moving. So if you want to concentrate on deeper, fuller breaths down low, that can increase the mobility of the thorax down by the basilar ribs and in and around that diaphragm itself. If you want to concentrate on kind of that pump handle work, which is really important for hyperrespiration for your athletes who are going to speed up and run or row or bike ride or, you know, anything that's going to require a lot more cardiovascular work. It's important for that whole pump handle and upper thorax to really be able to be mobile to kick in as well. And if it's being held stiff or for whatever reason, the movement pattern isn't allowing this to move as much, they're trying to really hyperrespirate with their diaphragm, it's not going to work. And that's when you get into that shallow breathing pattern, the one where you've got the, you know, the ribs going up and down like this, you know, and it kind of looks like just a barrel sliding up and down on a pole. And you know, and that kind of breathing is important if somebody is like having a huge response to a huge, you know, a huge stress response. But it's not, we don't want people running around breathing like that in just normal, quiet, everyday movement, or especially laying down. You know, and a lot of our clients will come to us that have a lot of pain and they'll lie down and you can really see this barrel chest, you know, kind of, or this hyper, you know, work of the accessory muscles in the neck, you know, trying to just pull on that first rib and, you know, get the air going in there, because for whatever reason, their diaphragm has now stopped working as a respiratory muscle. Their upper thorax is being held stiff, and they are now using their diaphragm and some of those chest muscles as postural control muscles. And I think that feeds into what you were talking about, where when you get that moving better, then you find out where they're not really having great coordination control, generally around that pelvic girdle or in the shoulder neck complex, or even down as far as the foot.
I've seen that, you know, since the thorax is a really key area of load transfer in the body. And obviously the breath is so important. I tend to look, you know, I'll have people take, you know, a couple, you know, apical breaths and some lateral costal breaths and diaphragmatic breaths, and just to see what works better for what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for some decompression, you know, a lot of patients tend to overactivate their external and internal obliques, and they insert obviously onto the ribs, and that's a pattern that I have found a lot, significantly, especially external obliques, usually overactive on the opposite side of where the ribs are translated. So that's what I tend to find. And I always believe that, or not always, but I tend to believe in many patients that there's certain muscles that are culprits or, you know, that tend to drive this, I feel stiff, even though they're not stiff. And, you know, the serratus anterior is a big one. The pecs are really big for the upper ribs, the clavicular head of the pec minor. Those are ones that I tend to do a lot of coordination with. I do a lot of dynamic release now. So I'll have them do some upper chest breath, you know, hands against the wall, and they'll be, you know, facing the wall, hands against the wall, and they'll go side to side, and I'll have them breathe and start to do some dynamic release of some of those muscles, especially pecs, serratus, external obliques. I do a lot in sitting. I think we mentioned this last time on the Facebook Live, but, you know, in sitting, hands on the plinth, just getting right in under there, like a diaphragm release, going in there, having them breathe, having them move hands forward on the plinth, even in sitting, doing some seated thoracic rotation, doing some release work there, combining like the breath with trunk rotation to the right, releasing external oblique on the left, whatever it is for the patient you're seeing. But I like to incorporate the breath with the release now, not just because it's quicker, but I think I believe in much more dynamic work, much more than I've ever have. I don't know about you, but I don't get people lying on the table much anymore for release. I do, but I'm really getting them much more against the wall, sitting, rotation, you know, doing a squat if I'm on their foot, you know, and things like that. So with the thorax, for me, I find that the dynamic work with the breath is much more helpful for the patient. And you can unmask a lot of muscles that are gripping or holding them in this position. So when you end up releasing a muscle at an end range of, let's say, rotation, thoracic rotation, you'll get more rotation, but it'll unmask other movement discoordinations or movement patterns that you are trying to resolve, right? So,
Right.
you know.
Exactly. And so since we're in the age of where people are asking a lot of questions about how do I do this and virtually without being able to touch anybody, and I don't have any TheraBand with me. I thought I had some in the room with me, but you can teach people to do this, while on their own. They can sit in a chair. And when Erica was talking about her hands being on the lower thorax, you can bring the TheraBand around that and they can all stand up where you can kind of see, the arms, holding, and it comes around, whichever part of the thorax you want to do. You could do side bending. You could do rotations with resistance. You could do rotation with less resistant, like moving into it, like the resistance pulling them around into the area they want to go. You can have them breathe into that. You can have them flex down and work. I'm a big person that believes that you can't get great extension if you don't get flexion. You got to have both. Particularly in the thorax. And it's one of those areas that we probably know the littlest about, but it actually is one of the most self-correcting pieces or functional regions of the body that can, once you get something going, because it's so led by breath, that it tends to self-correct. Here's another one, though, that works really well. I love what you were talking about, Erica, with your hands on the body. And we're talking about maybe they can get in a chair and use the back of a chair. They could use a foam roller in a chair against their back. Or they could pull a belt around or a TheraBand around. But here's another one that they can do, which works really, really well, is you can actually bring that on and you can have them take a breath in as they turn their head and then a breath out as they come back in and a breath in as they turn their head, because the head is going to turn, the ribs are going to respond right around that whole thorax. And if you want to feel it, just put your fingers on, you can reach up behind and put your thumbs on, a couple of rib heads there and just feel what happens when you turn your head. You'll feel the ribs will move in different directions. And so you don't want to drive somebody with all this breath work into hyper, into like a little acidosis or where they need to have the paper bag.
Right.
But you can use the head along with breath, or you can use the head completely in side bending of the head. Rotation and flexion of the head can really help, especially if you're kind of doing it like we were talking today in the podcast about closed chain with the eyes, which is the eyes being fixed and the head moving around the eyes. So we can have the thorax being fixed and the head or the pelvis underneath, moving and driving some of that from, the system from out coming into the system, rather than that system having to be the prime mover and then everything else falling into place too. So that can work well on an exercise ball. So you can get your clients lined up in front of the camera, have them put the thorax, around wherever they feel like that they're, because they can tell you, like, where do you feel like you're not moving well? Put that TheraBand there and hold it there. And while you're sitting there, I want you to just kind of get a little input. That's what we're doing, right? A sensory input with a TheraBand. And then have them like sit on the ball and maybe just slide one foot forward and back and another foot forward and back, or just kind of rock back and forth. If they're not steady on the ball, they can sit on their chair like we're doing now. And they can move the pelvis, and do different things. They can stand up. They can do it with your very favorite exercise, which is the squat.
No. Oh my God, I love the squat.
But they can, they can hold that and work into a squat, and they'll feel. So Erica talks a lot, and I think you all know this who have listened to our podcast in the past. Erica will talk a lot about what the thorax is doing when somebody goes down into a full squat. And, when you and they may not be aware of it, but sometimes if they have that TheraBand around there, they're going to feel that stuff happen and you can do it even with something, if your client can't squat all the way down or it's not appropriate for them, you can do that with sit to stand. Which is when a lot of people have issues is within transitional movements, which is why you like the squat so much, because it gets the hips, the knees, the feet, and everything else. But it's kind of a very cool way, because we're thinking along the lines of virtual work, that we can start coming up with, how can I get this? How can I substitute what I would maybe cue or kind of, prod along or just be present with them, for sensory input. How can I get that to happen
Yep.
without me being there, without
Yeah.
my hands being there, but still get the same input to the system and get them to actually be aware of what it is they're trying to work on. Like, do you feel when you come this way, you rotate pretty well? What happens when you go the other way? Which one feels stiffer? Well, it's this one. Okay, and then this is a fun one. Let's go to the way where it feels easy for a few times and see if that cleans up going to the opposite.
And it usually does, right?
Right. So they don't have to like struggle against the stiffness.
Yes.
Because we see so much of that kind of holding in the thorax.
Yes, yes. And I also like I love the TheraBand idea. That's a great idea. I also do, my favorite exercise is now the wall squat, where I have the patient face the wall, hands on the wall, and they just squat down, and they keep their arms there, so they get a good, nice decompression of the thorax. And if they have foot issues, you can add some foot stuff, you can add side to side, you can do one-legged standing, but the squat really is a great way to incorporate closed chain work with the breath, and also just getting the load on the wall with the thorax. And people who have, this is my clinical experience, that people who have a loss of movement, or loss of control, I should say, dyskinesia, discoordination in the thorax, tend to have abdominal muscles that are somewhat weak. Not so much, they're over recruiting obliques. So I like the input on the wall, because that will add a little bit of a abdominal stimulus. Then they can do like a wall land, or we talked about doing like going into wall dog, into a plank position on the wall. So like a down dog, but on the wall, doing down dog, and then a plank, then going into a table dog, into plank, things like that. I do a lot with the thorax because of the abdominal, I don't even like to say weakness, but abdominal issues there. And so that's why I love the closed chain thoracic work. I have found personally, I don't know what your experience is, that we have patients that do really well, whether they have a glenohumeral issue with an upper thoracic, issue, or a neck problem. There are some people who do really well with closed chain upper body, but they can't lift a foam block above their head without a loss of control. Do you see that as well? I mean,
yeah, I do. I do. And I think a lot of that is it kind of follows Shirley Sarman's work, where you have she calls it the dog wagging the dog wagging the tail, or the tail wagging the dog. And I think that's a typical example of the arm being the tail, and they're unable to disassociate, scapular elevation and rib elevation and rotation, with arm lifting. But if you put their arm on something and hold it steady, they can rock backwards and forwards, so they can get full arm elevation. Like if they put their arm on, on a tabletop or the sink, like they hold on to the sink, and they can step backwards until they're in full arm elevation, and they can do that without the trunk elevating.
Yeah.
So there, there's part of that is kind of like, how do we make that coordination between a closed chain movement where they have a sense of control, to being able to control that arm in free space, and an upper chain, and an open chain movement.
Right.
And,
right.
And I think part of it is some of the things you talk about with, as you start with the arms on the wall, or tabletops, or desktops, or, curbs, or floor, wherever you may be working, is that how you tend to get people to kind of back off of that and start beginning to work like, so, okay, you've got your hands on the wall. What happens if you do dynamic, you keep in touch with the wall, but you start to move those hands up and down the wall.
Yeah.
So then they can kind of come back away from that and mirror that movement, and begin to, and as soon as they start to lift, come back to the wall and slide on the wall. As soon as you come off, you see how you can cope with it, so that they can retrain that movement system.
Yep.
From that different input. Right. And they can do that from all positions with the hand on the wall, wherever.
Yes, like a clock, like we talked about clocks earlier,
right.
like a thoracic clock.
Put their hand on and rotate sideways, and so now they're working in this range, but they're still in contact with the wall. They lean into the wall, they push away from the wall, and they have.
No, those are great close kinetic chain.
And so the idea is back out of the leaning and the approximation from the closed chain to where it's just touch. And that sensory
Yes.
system starts to kind of like click in, like, okay, well, we're still doing the same thing because we're touching the wall.
Yep.
Now can I come off and just have fingertips and still maintain,
Right.
that new novel movement pattern for
Yep.
them, because they've moved in that other way for so long
Yeah.
that you can get that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, I've had some patients that they literally can't do an open chain activity, but they're really good with closed chain. And I'm like, okay, open chain, well, you've got, let's say a single arm lift. Well, you've got glenohumeral, you've got some neck issues. So maybe there's a secondary driver in the neck or the glenohumeral joint where they cannot do an open chain activity, but they're good with closed chain. So the clinical reasoning would suggest, well, maybe you should look maybe at their shoulder and at their neck. There's a lot of muscles in there that really connected that could prevent that. And I see that a lot actually, lately anyway. And I think that's a good, way to separate. I mean, if they're doing well with open and closed chain, but they're not doing well with one or the other, there's something else in there or involved, right?
And some of it could be as simple as you're talking about with the muscles being involved, the whole neural matrix being involved. So what's the protection mechanism? Was it because they had pain? So the system is protecting them. And that's why that non-disassociated movement pattern has set up. Or is it because they literally have power outage, muscle weakness, from an injury, because we know that injuries, if muscles don't heal right, they can be weak, or we can have power outages, they can be from something maybe coming from the neck neurologically. So we could have a power outage into some of the deep muscles of the shoulder that are supposed to help, really rock and roll that humeral head around, but that are getting a power outage from C5.
Exactly.
And because of, maybe there's a little bit of nerve root compression. Doesn't have to mean they have pain. It doesn't have to mean anything else. But when you're seeing some of that teasing out, is it a weakness? Is it a true power outage problem? Or is it because it's being over recruited somewhere else, it's being under recruited here? And if we get rid of the over recruitment, does that help boom up the under recruitment to like kind of turn on?
Exactly. So is it a true strength deficit? Let's say anterior deltoid, or is it a motor control issue, which is being driven somewhere, down-regulating that C5, and all of a sudden their anterior deltoid turns on? Well, it's not a really strength deficit, right? I mean, if it doesn't turn on, you got to start doing delt work. You got to start loading that joint or that system. But a lot of times it's really motor control, but you need to find out where that's being driven from. And also in the thorax, I found that many times it's especially with the single arm lift, it's not a true strength problem. It's really being driven from a secondary issue, and I've seen that much more in open chain. And I have found that especially in sitting, when I have my patients do like bilateral arm lifts, just to see, a lot of them tend to sort of do this sort of thoracic, this posterior translation. So I end up making them sit up straight up in a chair so they can't cheat. And it's amazing how they can't lift their arms because they're not translating the thorax. And
I love that, because to me, then when we get to that situation, like, okay, I get them in a different posture. So I know that if they slump down, they can raise their arms up. Okay, great. I don't need to work on that. They already have that pattern. What pattern are they lacking? Well, I can't lift anything up into the cabinets because that requires me moving my thorax in a different position. And now I can't cope with getting my arms up.
Right.
And so then the question becomes, is it a weakness problem? Is it an over recruitment problem? Is it a neural tension problem? Because maybe why they can't get their arms up now is because it's just like, they've got a neural tension thing going on. And we've loaded them, in a different way with both arms going up. And so what happens if we just raise the arm that doesn't seem to be affected, or, the unaffected side, or not as affected as much side, whatever one you want to call it? Can they cope with it on that side? They can't cope with it on this side. So we've got a whole bunch of fun things to play around with and kind of go, how can we get that better? And, knowing how the brain works too, if we can get both arms going and doing, then we get that crossover.
Exactly.
Mirror neurons and different things that are happening, across. So because that's why pain spreads, because of mirror neurons, that like, okay, well, you're sending out over recruitment and heightened things to the back of the brain. I'm going to start doing that too.
Yeah, they get jealous.
And then all of a sudden the brain says, okay, well, I'll protect this side too, because I'm getting the same input from this side that I was getting from this side. So that,
Yeah.
doing that,
Yeah.
those arm things are good. And then that's when you can get into some fun things with the thorax that I like to do, which is a lot of crossover stuff. So start where Erica starts with the wall dogs and the wall squats and all of those wonderful things. And then, as we talked about backing out of closed chain, you could actually just even increase and have them come closer together.
Yes.
And actually have them cross.
Oh, I love that one.
So now you're getting into the neurological, parts about the space occupying around. And if we put it into this space over here, the brain recognizes that as the left side.
Yep.
But if we cross, then we've got things cross and we've got the neurological system crisscrossed.
Oh, I love that one.
We're really loading up some cool information going inside that they have to kind of start processing. So maybe they stop holding or they stop using that older movement pattern or that when they're kind of stuck in.
Yep.
We've given them some novel things to work on.
Yeah, and that also gets into the rotation because the thorax is the main center of rotation. And
right, so every time you reach across, you have to rotate. So that's for that. I think I hate names of exercises because sometimes they don't mean anything to me. But when the ones where you're on hands and knees and you take the arm and you reach under the other arm, I think they call it thread the needle or something.
Needle.
To me, it's just like it's a reach under. So you just reach under and look, and you can add the head and you can actually turn the head in the opposite direction.
Yep.
So, so I think somebody had a question before the Facebook Live talking about thoracic rings, but I think if we're talking about levels, perhaps maybe where they're stiff, it's like when you begin to reach under, how can you move your arm to where you're feeling that stiffness in that one level?
Yep.
And then can you turn your head opposite?
Yeah.
Because that kind of tends to just, do a counter rotation. Right. So maybe you're getting a little bit more specific with the movement pattern.
Yeah, and
do we know if that's needed or not? I don't know. I think it's just fun to vary the patterns enough to get them doing some new and different things.
Exactly. And it engages muscle barriers and it tests limits of their system. I agree. I think doing multiple region movement is a good thing. And one thing I like to do in the open chain, I know we talked a lot about closed chain, but if someone is at the point in their program where they're doing, just a bilateral arm lift, a single arm lift, if you're in supine or sitting, is going to be a lot harder because that's going to engage the abdominals and that's also going to engage some rotation. So those are great progressions if your patient has an issue with an open chain, if you want them to do an arm lift. So, I start generally with a foam block or like a weight in between, then I'll do bilateral and then I'll do singles to get the abdominal. And I also like to do, I think the podcast that came out today was a patient of mine who had her issue and her main issue was her thorax. But I believe that we need to include lower quarter closed chain or even open chain to challenge that thorax. And so what I tend to do a lot is I do a lot of lateral lunges. That's tough for the thorax. That will unmask maybe a lower quarter issue. It can unmask a foot secondary issue. And in my patient in the podcast today, I had her jumping, it unmasked a foot issue. And that was the secondary. So that's one of the reasons why I like to incorporate the lower quarter. I do a lot of lateral lunges. I do those star lunges as well. Those are actually, I believe, easier to do star lunges than lateral lunges. And then those, we talked about this on a podcast a while ago, deep squat, wide base and do side to side. That'll really get the thorax. And then, what I tend to do lastly, and I'm sort of condensing this, I really add full rotation. I mean, the famous bow and arrow, and I'll tend to do a lot of rotation with lunge and rotation in squatting, triangle pose, different yoga positions.
Half kneeling is also a good one too.
Great.
For being able to challenge that.
Yep.
And see how they're kind of coping with that. So it's interesting because we have talked a lot about this on a couple of the podcasts, and I looking at just that whole kinetic chain from the foot up and the thorax down to the foot can make a huge difference, because I know this. I've watched performing artists and vocalists for a long time, and some of the postures that they hold their thorax in can change the mechanics of their breath and mechanics of their movements, down. They can't hold releve on point. They can't until the thorax begins to like loosen up and change and can go with it. And that's when we can get into that thing with the lower quarter, which is a little different from the upper quarter, is how do they cope with load transfer?
Yep.
Because that's what the lower quarter is all about. It's load transfer and walking and running and side to side and shifting and moving and, standing back and walking backwards and getting in and out of cars. It's all load transfer. And how do they cope with it? And if you are having to balance something that's being held like a bowling ball on top of it, it's going to change how you actually move side to side, round and whatever. And since as humans we're driven to move in that sagittal plane all the time, we can cope with that a lot better than we can cope with the lateral lunges like you were talking about, or any kind of thing with rotation, especially if we're having to carry and balance this, from the thorax up, this kind of block on top. And that can bring a lot of pressures down into the pelvis, the pelvic floor, into the hip joints, and down into the knees and the ankles. And they have to perform differently under that compression.
Yes. And I agree. I mean, I also add, I don't have a TheraBand with me. It's in my other room, but like a TheraBand holding, like just a yellow TheraBand, and I have them, and that's really challenging for the thorax. You can have them squat and have them, sort of lift up the arms a little bit, pulling against the band isometrically. You can have them rotate, pulling against the band, doing any kind of lunge, lateral lunge, forwards lunge, backwards lunge, squatting. You can have them lie on their back. I mean, I tend to get people off the table quickly, deep squatting, but that TheraBand holding like that really challenges the control in the thorax.
Yeah.
When you start to incorporate lower quarter closed chain work, even just because they have shoulder pain doesn't mean that you don't do lower extremity exercise. I do, because that it's functional. And they need to, and if the cause of their shoulder problem is in their thorax, you need to do movement that's going to challenge the thorax and not just have them lift their arm up all day. So lateral lunges and other types of rotational movements will do that, but you can incorporate the thorax with the band. So that's the one I like. That's my another go-to I use a lot as well.
Yeah, and I like that because they can also take that into walking. And they can do it opposite with walking. And this is the reason why I like that, is for if we think about closed chain and the tail wagging the dog versus the dog wagging the tail, and you have them, if you just sit in your chair and you can either put your hands on either side of your thigh and just press in, or you can just press it down, just hold on to your chair on both sides, or you can just take your elbows and hold them, into your body like you're holding onto something, and then take a super deep breath in. And you'll feel your whole chest, the upper chest wall begin to rise, because now what we're doing is we're asking the pecs to lift the chest wall, because we're holding the pecs still, we're holding the shoulders still. Right. So I love that when we're getting into some of those higher exercises for people who are going to be rowing, because then you can do it this way with the rowing, but particularly the walking, running, that type of exercise is getting that going. Because why do we move our arms? Because we're rotating. Yep. But we have to think about deeper into the physiological systems of respiration. Why do we do this when we're running? Because we need to hyperrespirate for the cardiovascular pump. And that is how we get the pectoralis pulling that rib cage and getting that to move and change so that we can get the air in quicker and faster for that period. Where we don't want to see this is now when they're sitting quietly. Right. Are they having to do all of this crazy stuff to breathe?
Yes. It's funny. I look at thoracic rotation in all of my runners, no matter what complaint they have, because you need to rotate when you run. And it's interesting. I hadn't thought of the breath in that way before.
And if you're thinking about where to position the TheraBand on the thorax, especially if you're working live or virtual with people, it matters not. You can just, even if you feel the whole rib cage and it's like, I don't know where it's coming from. I just don't know. There's ways you can go in and find stiff segments if you want to. And you can do that. You can do a little PA gliding and, feel around and stuff and kind of like, they feel pretty stiff here. Maybe if we got some input in there and got that moving, we could do that. But the other thing is that you can just put that TheraBand around them, around their lower ribs, around the middle, and around the upper, like up under the arms, and see how the movement pattern changes with that input.
Yes.
So if you're going to do Erica squat, do it with that TheraBand in a couple of different positions on the thorax and see, does it look better? Does it feel better? Do they cope with load transfer better if it's up higher or if it's down lower?
I love it.
And you can do a test and retest that way to see.
Right. And you can do narrow base of support squat, normal base of support squat, and wide base of support squat, because that challenges the nervous system and the thorax in different ways. So in a sense, what you're saying is that, let's say we're doing a virtual session and the patient has the TheraBand. Let's see if we can make a modification to your upper thorax with the TheraBand. Let's see what it does to your movement that's meaningful for you, or what functional movement that you're assessing. Right? That's basically what you're saying, because you're trying to correct without obviously our hands, but you're trying to modify a region of the body with the TheraBand, and see what effect it has on the other parts of their system. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's great for a virtual, because you can't do that on your own.
Right. And so, like I said, in this day and age where we're all kind of like going, what can we do? How can I look at this virtually? What do I do? And so my question is always, my comment is always, get curious. I wonder what would happen if. Do you have a belt around? Do you have a towel? Do you, what do you, because people have towels, they have belts, they've got scarves. Scarves work perfectly. If they don't have TheraBand, you can always, get them to order some TheraBand and have it for the next session or whatever. But, they have these kinds of things. They've got towels that they can roll up, for input, and you can, speaking of thorax and doing some cool stuff too, you can have them lay down on a towel roll where they feel like they, because they'll tell you, I've got a stiff side, I feel stiff right there. Well, lay down on top of the towel roll where you're stiff. And now let's work on those arm movements up and down. And you can watch them, whether live or virtually, and you can sit there and just say, okay, only bring your arms up to the ceiling and lower down. Or maybe let's just start with your arms, the elbows bent by the body, and just work on raising up and coming back in, and add any visuals you want to add. I see Allie's on here, and Allie's great with visuals. She has all kinds of wonderful somatic work she does with movement.
Oh, awesome.
And, I've learned a lot from her, and Eric Franklin does a lot of visuals.
Oh, totally.
About like, you have like, air balloons that are lifting your arms up into the air. It changes the movement pattern. But they can work on where they're a little bit stiff, and you can work on that open chain stuff where they're laying down versus standing up, to see if they cope with that a little easier, or if that helps them a bit.
Yeah, and it's also like a self-release too.
Yeah,
you're directing them to treat themselves, basically.
Right, they're doing the movement over the thing, which could have been your hands or something else too.
Yep.
And those are fun things to do.
Yeah, there's also just one of the podcast listeners had asked about like thoracic progressions, and we've been talking about them. One of the things that I'll do a lot of is I'll have them do, like, it's hard to demo, but I'll have them do like a PNF with like a hip flexion in standing. So you're going to get that sort of right arm to the opposite left hip, and then the right arm to the right hip, and then the left arm to the left hip, and the left arm to the right hip. So you'll get that closed, you'll get that open chain, everything basically, but you're going to get the rotation, because it's going to train that, and it will unmask certain things. I've been there. If the more complex or the more persistent the issue is, there generally is more than one region of the body where you need to intervene. There's one area I think that you'll get the most bang for your buck. But when you start to, and you'll see in this podcast that was released today, when you start to load the system and have, depending on who you're treating or the type of patients that you're treating and their goals, the more load and impact that you put into their system, it will unmask compensations that didn't appear because you kept you at the beginning, because the load wasn't sufficient enough, as it shouldn't have been, because you were starting out. But if someone wants to do a handstand, and if someone wants to run, you need to have them jump side to side, have them do side jumps, clock jumps, to challenge the thorax, and that will certainly challenge the foot. And anything side to side in a plyometric will challenge that. And if someone comes back and says, oh, my foot's hurting, and you'll see in the podcast today, she has a secondary issue in her foot. And so you'll help your patients that way by progressing them through these patterns, and using TheraBand and just being creative and engaging, head and neck and arms and everything, because that's life, right? We pick up people, we pick up children, we reach across, we do everything in 3D. Mm-hmm. And if we're just doing basic sagittal plane movement, it's not going to cut it. I don't think, anyway. I don't see, there's Ty. Hey, Ty, how are you?
Hi, Ty.
Ty's in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, we could go on and on, but anything else to add, Susan?
I just think that as you're talking about diagonals and the stuff, and if anybody listened to the podcast today that just came out or that dropped today, or the way, if you listen to it in the next 2 weeks, we are starting to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into the neurological system, which was my original love, and spent a lot of time with and still do. And I always kind of tie back into that system. And I think that, as we kind of move out of one region where there may have been tightness or pain or whatever words you want to put on it, we need to reintegrate back into the whole system, because it's not just the shoulder that isn't moving. Now that we have, okay, so you've looked at the shoulder and you've got the shoulder out of pain a little bit, and maybe there was some issue with the neck and a nerve root, or, whatever, sensitization through there. But you don't just end there. You got to, how does that look now with these movements, these big body movements that they need to do? How does it look with lifting and rolling and moving and picking up and lifting up and all of those different kinds of things? How do they cope with reintegrating that movement back into the system? Mm-hmm. Because it may have all started from, 20 years ago, because they couldn't weight bear on their left foot.
Yeah.
And so they offloaded and things changed, and then they had occupational, determinants and other kinds of things that went on. Mm-hmm. And you get all that done. And then, like in your podcast that we dropped today, then a foot issue emerged. And it was like, okay, now we're back, we're kind of like peeling the onion. And now there's this, let's go ahead and get the foot back into this kinetic chain.
Yep.
that we've just created, help this person create, and make yep. sure it, so that we have that change of movement system pattern, yep. With a lot of variance, and not just on a specific region.
Yeah.
We don't work region to region.
Yeah. And we talked about, with the podcast today, she's going on to BOSU now, and she's doing lateral lunges onto a BOSU. So that's going to challenge the system neurologically as well. That'll challenge the thorax, that'll challenge the foot, that'll definitely challenge her balance. So I'm doing a lot of more work now with patients, balance, foam pad, BOSU, no matter what their driver is, because it will challenge the entire system. And, I think that, especially with this podcast today, because she had issues with the thorax, she really started, we actually got her into a half kneel, I guess it is, lunge, but your knees are on the ground, half kneel, mm-hmm. and taking her lower quarter out and doing rotation, and, me pulling the band one way, her, and then going the other side, and her doing the other side. So I'm trying to do like an isometric, and she's trying to stabilize her thorax in a half kneel position. And those are other great positions to do these progressions in. Full kneel as well. It just takes out your lower quarter, mm-hmm. Which is fine for her. But then when we got the lower quarter involved, that's when the foot was unmasked. But she had issues in the half kneel and kneeling positions trying to mm-hmm. control her thorax. Understandably, she's 3 kids sitting like this all day, with one kid on each hip,
right. It's movement patterns that served at one time in her life and was not serving her very well anymore.
Yep.
Exactly. It's time, but people don't realize it, because that's the way our movement system works. It's supposed to be efficient. If this is the stress that it's under, if this is the occupation, the physical demands for your body, it's going to set down movement patterns that make it very efficient for you.
Yeah,
that's the way we're designed neurologically, and it's not going to change it unless you make it change. Mm-hmm. And so it requires all of this stuff. It requires taking it to much deeper neurological levels, I think, for these complex, not really complex movement, but whole body kind of movements.
Yeah.
But it also requires consistency.
Yeah.
And you want to give people things that they can do consistently. That's going to be part of their consistent life. Not, these are my exercises I go do.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how can we challenge them during walking? Because they're going to walk every day.
Mm-hmm.
If they're lifting it, what are the things that they're doing every day? How can we challenge that and make it better? How are they working? How's the setup? How they're working? Can they vary that setup throughout the day so they can have different and novel physiological demands into their system and not the same one that they're just kind of like in all the time?
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I
Yeah.
do. And the more I do this, the more I guess as I go on in my career, I really find that, we talk about this a lot, but you need to load the system more than I think than what we do.
Right.
You need to, and we've talked about this, and that
Mhm.
will, and the thorax is a key area of load transfer. You need to load their system. Okay.
Mhm.
Even if it's someone who is sedentary, they carry groceries, don't they? They carry things down the street. At least in New York, we do everywhere else.
Yep.
So that's,
Mhm.
a common theme. So you need, even they're 80 years old.
They need it more than ever.
Yes, exactly. You need to sit there and do the bilateral arm lifts with the band and the squats because these
Mhm.
people are walking and they're carrying, and even if they're
Mhm.
80, I mean, they do need it more than ever. I agree. So I don't see any questions. Do you? Oh yes, with prolonged, Sai says, especially with prolonged sit, reach tasks, driving, computer. Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. It's funny with the driving. I don't drive much in the city. I sold my car years ago, but I have found from talking to people who do drive, there's a preferred pattern of driving.
Mhm.
So they're like this, and they're doing this with the hand, like the right hand's on the wheel, and they come and say, well, my neck hurts with driving. Well, how do you drive? Oh, I drive like this, or I drive like this,
Mhm.
and that's important for people. Those are, depending
Mhm.
how long you spend in traffic, those are movement patterns, especially for people who have issues up in the
Or
upper.
right. And is the drive stressful?
Exactly.
Because then that's a threat. And over time, that threat can turn into a pain, it doesn't have to, but it can turn into a pain response, or it can turn into a threat response, or it can turn into
Right.
an anxiety, it can
Yes.
do a lot of different things because if it's stressful over time, it can be like sitting with the tiger in your car next to you. And people, get more hyped up, with their drive, and then all drive begins to feel that way, not just a long, stressful one.
Yeah, that would be me. I don't
So,
drive. I mean, I could drive, but I don't do well in traffic,
mm,
and so that would probably be me as a driver. I would
mm.
be like this.
And the other thing to consider, and I'm not going to pick on the flex trunk or the flex thorax, because I find more people hold themselves rigidly ramrod straight than they do,
Yes.
in a flex position. But driving, the way that the seats are designed, they're designed like this on purpose. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my hand backwards. They're designed like this on purpose because it mitigates the effect of your head going backwards in a rear end and with a rear end collision. So the seats are designed forward on purpose so that when
Right.
you go back in a flex position and hit, and you don't hyperextend.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but it puts you in that position. And so if you're there all the time, you're going to develop a posture that settles into that position. Now,
Yeah.
is that a bad position? No. People need that position. We need to slump. But do we want to spend all of our time in that position? Probably not. We want to be
Yeah.
able to move in and out of those positions as much as possible so that we can extend our thorax and lift up and put something up overhead.
Yep.
Because if we're here and this is all we can do, and we can't do this, then we're not going to be able to get our arms up, and we're going
Yep.
to, do something different, or just never put anything up overhead,
Yep.
which
Yep.
is what a lot of people end up doing. They just quit doing the things that are too hard, and they don't even realize that they've done it.
Yep. Yep. Path of least resistance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we don't pay attention to those things.
No.
They come on slow, so we just normalize them as we go. And then one day we look at something and go, I have no idea how I'm going to get that up there. How
Right.
did that happen? I used to could reach up to the top of the closet. Now what am I don't even think I can do it.
Yeah.
And then they stand there staring going, when did this happen?
Yeah.
And the truth is it didn't happen yesterday.
No.
It's been happening for a while. Now they just may be having a pain experience at the top of their shoulder or in their, upper back area because,
Yep.
they just are. So
Yep.
they've not moved in a while, and the nerves have gotten a little sensitive. And
Mm-hmm. That's why I love the down dog, and even the kids stay with the backpacks. I mean, it's a lot that goes in those backpacks. And I mean, I see with my niece, they're always in this sort of little bit of a flexed posture, and you ask them, and then they're in front of the computer now much more than ever with the whole virtual schooling that's going on. They can't extend, they can't open their rib cage, their diaphragm, the obliques become really tight. You can have somebody lie in a foam roller all they want, but if you don't work and release those obliques and do the diaphragmatic work, they're not getting anywhere. That's my opinion anyway.
Hi, Amelia. Long time no see. It's good to see you. Hi, Christine. Welcome.
I don't see anybody.
Here is
Christine.
my.
Hi, Christine.
If you hit on comments, you'll see the people pop up.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Amelia is from New Orleans.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we worked at LSU together. Lots and lots of people in common. Good friend.
That's great.
So for all of you who are dealing with your own homeschooling, your own online work, virtual work, and especially if you have kids that are home, really kind of hanging out in front of the computer a lot. My rule for kids, because I treat a lot of young performing artists and I see this a lot with them, is that they go and they sit cross-legged on the floor with their computer in front of them. And I don't mind that posture. I don't mind it at all, but I don't want them to live in it. And and they're having trouble, they're having problems because they're exhausted and they're stressed out trying to get all their schoolwork done. That may not be the case now. They may be stressed for another reason, but my rule for kids is 5 positions to do your homework in, and one of them has to be upside down.
Oh, I love it. Upside down. How do they do that? They lie like this, and
I think so. And I'll problem solve with them. Like, what could you do upside down? I could read my book. Yeah, I said you don't have to be there for more than a few minutes, but I want you to. We need to be in all these positions, and then so one of them came. The mom said to me, she goes, "Well, they told me that you said it was okay for them to hop up on the countertop and read." And, and I just looked at the parent and I was thinking to myself, why is that a problem?
Yeah.
They're in the kitchen with you.
Yes.
Like, can you get, maybe if we give more permission to be more in different, and so
like a kid.
Homeschooling, it's okay. Let them lay over the beanbag chair, and flop halfway on the couch and off the couch to do these things. Let them get in different positions.
Yeah, I agree.
And not have to sit ramrod straight at the kitchen table. Maybe all of this will start changing how all of our kids are sitting in school all day long. Maybe we'll begin to force the rule of movement back into the school system again, and start to change some things. So, but for all of us, we're still doing the same thing too. So my challenge to everyone out there who is doing a lot of at home work and a lot of different things is to vary your position. Really, you don't have to, don't get a standing frame and stand all day. Don't get a chair and sit all day, but move around and do some different things. Find another place to work for a while. I took my computer downstairs to the kitchen today to get up. We had sunshine in Pittsburgh, so it was like a red letter day. The windows are open, the sun is out, and and I'm downstairs where we're getting the best amount of sunlight coming in. And that was great. And just be sure that you're not just taking breaks from your work, but that you're putting your work in different positions and postures. And so you can keep that thorax moving.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. I'm in a New York City apartment, so my options are limited in terms of space, but I've got the couch, the desk, my balcony's still shut. I can't get out there yet. I've got my bed, my bedroom and things like that. But
you got your kitchen countertop.
I was on my tummy on my sofa today and going, oh, I don't like that position, but I have to try that again on the floor. I'm going to move the chair by the window tomorrow to get some sun because I need sun. Things like that. I agree. That's great advice for anybody, and get that thorax moving, because I agree with you. I think that we do sit too much. We do. So, all right. Well, thank you guys. This was great.
So feel free to drop some comments in as we go. Tag us when you do, so we'll come in and answer. And thanks for joining us on our Facebook Live number 2.
Yes.
And
round 2.
everybody be at peace. Take care of yourself. Take care of the others around you. let's all just keep motoring forward as much as hard as it can be sometimes. It's fun to get together and do these kinds of things. At least it's great for my soul.
Me too.
To have people, to be able to connect with Erica live and in person on virtual, but to also see the names and the people coming through.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of how connected we all still really are, rather than how socially isolated many of us feel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Big hug, kiss. Thank you all for listening. See you soon. Bye.